Hello all, welcome to Paritranaya. In this class, we shall discuss about the Indian Councils Act of 1892. In the previous class, we discussed about the Indian Councils Act of 1861, so it is the next continued part. So before we start with this topic, let us make few assumptions in order to make our discussions easier. So we already come across a concept called as Central Legislative Council and Provincial Legislative Council. So here, in order to connect these topics, let us assume that Central Legislative Council is similar to Rajya Sabha. Okay, Rajya Sabha. So it can be compared to Lok Sabha as well, or in general to Parliament. But just to make our discussions easier, we shall compare, or we shall assume that Central Legislative Council is similar to Rajya Sabha. Similarly, Provincial Legislative Council, so here LC indicates Legislative Council, is similar to Legislative Council in a state. So we all know that every state has legislative assembly, but not all the states have legislative council. Few of the states have legislative council. So let us assume Karnataka's legislative council. So Karnataka has MLCs. So legislative council is similar to what? Provincial legislative council is similar to a state's legislative council. So let us make these assumptions. Now next, we also come across a concept called as official and non-official. So both at the central as well as at the provinces, we have members, and some members are official members and some members are non-official members. Official members, non-official members, official members, non-official members. So let us not dive deeper into what exactly is the difference between official and non-official members. So not important from exam point of view, and also it will create confusion as well. So just to some extent you memorize it that both at the central level as well as at the provincial level, so there were both official members as well as non-official members. Okay, so this is the background. So based upon this, we shall understand that the Act of 1892, it increased the number of additional members in the central and provincial legislative councils. So what does it mean? It means it increased the members in the central legislative council, that is in Rajya Sabha, and also it increased the number of members in the provincial legislative council. So let us, in our example, assume it is Madras. So in Madras Legislative Council also, the number of members increased. In the Central Legislative Council also, the number of members increased. Similarly, in the Bombay Legislative Council also, the number of members increased. But as I said, there are two types of members, official members or non-official members. So which members increased? Official members or non-official members? So here we'll get the clue, non-official members. So among the official and non-official, so the non-official members increased, both at the center as well as at the provinces. For example, if previously there were 10 non-official members, now they might have become 15. If previously here there were 15 non-official members, now they might have become 20. Now from the exam point of view, the exact figure is not important. Whether they were 10 or whether they became 15, whether they were 15 or later on they became 20. So these values are not important. So what is important is through which act the number of non-official members in the Central Legislative Council increased. So one such act is 1892 Act. Similarly, through which act the number of non-official members in the Provincial Legislative Council increased. So again, 1892 Act. So this information would be sufficient. So we understood that the non-official members, they increased both at the Central Legislative Council as well as at the Provincial Legislative Council. Now next important thing is official majority. So in spite of the increase in the non-official members, official majority was retained. What does it mean? So you might have increased the non-official members from 10 to 15. You might have increased the non-official members here from 15 to 20 at the provinces. But irrespective of it, always the number of official members will be more compared to that of non-official members. For example, if we have non-official members 15, then official members will be more than 15. It may be 16, 17, 20 or somewhat. Similarly, at the provinces, if the non-official members are 20, then official members will be minimum, it will be 21, 22 or so on. Okay. So what do we understand? Through 1892 Act, even though the number of non-official members increased at both central and state level, but the official majority was retained both at the center as well as at the provinces. A very important point to note. Because in order to confuse us in the examination, they may frame a statement like this. Through 1892 Act, the majority of the non-official members increased in the Central Legislative Council. If they make such kind of statements, then you should be able to identify that that statement is wrong. Okay, so again, very important from exam point of view. Next, increase the functions of the legislative councils, gave them the power of discussing the budget and addressing the questions to executive. So if we look at our present system, So whenever there is a budget, so generally Lok Sabha, it is involved in discussing the budget. Okay. Now similarly, before the 1892 Act, there was no provision of discussing the budget. So whatever the executive, it will frame the budget, so that will be accepted by all, so nobody could question it. Now there is a provision for discussion. In the sense, so members of Central Legislative Council, they could stand up and they could ask, so why you are allotting so much money to a particular scheme, so we can reduce that money. So such kind of discussions used to take place both at the center as well as provinces. So this was an important feature added by 1892 Act. One more important feature is addressing questions to executive. So in present day, we have seen that legislature, it asks questions to the executive. Legislature is our Lok Sabha, it asks questions to our executive. So who is our executive presently at the central level? Council of Ministers headed by Prime Minister. So we have discussed in detail about all these aspects in a chapter called as Council of Ministers. So if at all you have any kind of confusion, then you can revisit our video related to this topic. So we know that Lok Sabha can ask questions to executive in the sense how much money they are spending, to which particular scheme they are spending, and why are they spending so much on so and so scheme. So all such kind of questions can be asked by Lok Sabha and to executive, and executive is responsible to Lok Sabha. So if executive does not perform its functions as per the expectations of Lok Sabha, then Lok Sabha can remove the executive. That is, it can remove the Council of Ministers headed by Prime Minister by passing a no confidence motion, and it can bring a new executive. Now, similar kind of provisions were introduced through 1892 Act. Not exactly like the present system, but here the Legislative Council members, they could ask questions to the executive. Okay, again a very important provision which was introduced through 1892 Act. Next, provided for nomination of some non-official members of the Central Legislative Council by the Viceroy on the recommendations of the Provincial Legislative Councils and Bengal Chamber of Commerce. So this point is also important. Now in the Central Legislative Council, we have official members and non-official members, but here we are only focusing on non-official members. So some of the non-official members were appointed by Viceroy. From where? From the provincial legislative councils. As an example, I have taken Bombay Provincial Legislative Council and Madras Provincial Legislative Council. So let us assume in Bombay Provincial Legislative Council there are 50 MLCs, and in Madras Provincial Legislative Council there are 60 MLCs. So these 50 MLCs of Bombay, they will recommend a particular person. Let us assume a person A. They will recommend that let this person A be appointed by Viceroy to the Central Legislative Council. So based on the recommendations of the Bombay Provincial Legislative Council, Viceroy, what he will do? He will appoint A as a non-official member to Central Legislative Council. Similarly, based on the recommendations of the Madras Provincial Legislative Council members, so let us assume they will propose the name of a person called as B. So this B will be appointed as non-official member by Viceroy to the Central Legislative Council. So this provision was added through 1892 Act. Next, apart from that, there was a chamber called as Bengal Chamber of Commerce. Okay, so this is just a group of people who are involved in commerce and all. So they had their own body. So for this body also, it recommended, let us assume, person C. So based on their recommendation, Viceroy appointed person C as non-official member to Central Legislative Council. So this provision, again, it was added through 1892 Act, a very important provision. Next, not only at the central level, but this provision also existed at the provincial level. So how is that? Okay. So this is at the provincial level. So I will, as an example, I will consider Madras Provincial Legislative Council. So few of the members who are appointed to Madras Provincial Legislative Council. What kind of members? Non-official members. Okay, very important. It's not official. Non-official members were nominated. So who used to nominate? Governor. Okay, very important. So governor used to nominate. Governor of which? Governor of Madras. So governor of Madras will nominate to Madras Provincial Legislative Council few non-official members. Similarly, Madras of Bombay will appoint few non-official members to what? Bombay Provincial Council, Legislative Council. So here I have taken Madras as an example. So while nominating, from where do these members will come? So these members will be representing various bodies. So few will come from district boards, few will come from municipalities, few from universities, trade associations, zamindars, and chambers. So all the district boards, they will what? Recommend a particular person. So let us assume district boards, it has totally around 100 people. So all these 100 people together, they will recommend a person A to governor. Similarly, municipalities will they'll decide and they'll recommend a person B to governor. Similarly, universities, trade unions, etc. So the people who have been recommended by district boards, municipalities, etc., for example, person A and B, so they will be nominated as non-official members of Madras Provincial Legislative Council. So again, a very important provision. Okay. This important provision was also added through Indian Councils Act of 1892. Next, if you look at the various provisions which we discussed now, when district boards recommended, when municipalities recommended, so while recommending, probably they might have followed some kind of procedure similar to that of an election. So from this we understand that indirect election provisions were used. The act made limited and indirect provisions for the use of election in filling up the non-official seats in the central and provincial legislative councils. So as we just discussed, so there was a recommendation from these various boards, both at the provincial level as well as at the central level. So when they are recommending, obviously there should have been some process which was similar to election. So indirect provisions of elections were used, but a very important point to note here is the word election is nowhere used in the whole of the 1892 Act. Again, this point is also very important. So in the examination, they may make a statement like this. So 1892 Act first time mentions about a process called as election. So if they make such kind of statement, that will be false. But if they make a statement like, so 1892 Act made a provision for a limited and indirect provisions for the use of election, yes, that statement will be right. So when we are reading this content, or when we are retaining the content, then we have to have that exam's demand in mind, okay? And we have to prepare accordingly. So this was about the Act of 1892. Similarly, in the subsequent classes, we shall discuss about the other important acts related to the evolution of the Constitution. For all our further updates, subscribe to our channel and hit on the bell icon. Thank you.